let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about some of the items on our agenda here. So let's talk about how your final is going to work for this class. I am not a fan of testing in the classical sense because I feel like it just teaches you to memorize instead of actually teaching you learning stuff. So the way that finals are going to work in my class, we're going to finish out some JavaScript stuff this week, and then you'll have a chance to start working on your final next week. This unit is essentially the last unit that we're doing in the traditional sense, right? So your final for this class is a project demonstrating everything you've learned so far, including the design process and the drafting process, in order to create one fully featured website that has an example of everything we covered this semester. So that's your entirety of HTML and CSS, multi-pages, file structure, relative paths in the HTML section, images, hyperlinks, all that cool HTML structural stuff that we've done. CSS, talking about how to resize things, how to adjust things, how to make things designed intentionally. And then whatever JavaScript we introduce, it'll be brief because we need a lot more time than we have for JavaScript. That will also play a part in your final web page for this class. Basically, you're making a demonstration of everything we talked about this semester, I mean, and showing it off as kind of like a resume, kind of a portfolio sort of situation. We will talk briefly about hosting, how you can actually put a website of your choice on the internet for free using GitHub. So you can tell all your family members, look at this cool website that I developed by myself, which is a pretty crazy flex. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. The gist is I'm not going to test you on paper in the usual sense. I'm going to have you do a project, a big project that demonstrates everything we learned. And you'll have next week and finals week time to finish it up. But I'm expecting the whole design process. You need to come up with an idea, propose your idea with something like an elevator pitch. You need to wireframe, you need to mock up, you need to do every step along the way of creating a page for your final. Okay, so as we approach the end of the semester, all of our deadlines for upcoming assignments, anything this week, are going to be January 19th. That is the last deadline. I cannot do the 3 weeks like we're used to, or the 2 extra weeks like we're used to. It's going to get closer and closer to the end of the semester. The 19th is the last day I will accept regular classwork. So make sure you get it in before then at the latest. All right, so I forgot to go live. We are live on the air. Let's talk about function declarations. So I'm going to get into my VS Code here, and we're going to talk about the brief setup. This was first periods. So I'm going to go to open a folder and then open up my second period folder. And I'm going to open up the whole Unit 7 root so that I can still see everything that I was working with. I'm going to go quickly through the page setup process because we've done it a bunch. The only thing I'm going to take a little more time on is the JavaScript portion. So I'm going to right click and make my 7.2 index as well as my 7.2 style sheet and JavaScript file. So we'll go through that really quickly. 7.2 index dot, and then we'll do HTML like normal. Oops, that's not what I want. All right, come on. Okay, I'm trying to go fast. Okay, so this is stuff that we've done 100 times at this point, so I'm not going to tell you every step along the way. You should know by now. P2, and then, oh, I did it backwards. See, I don't P2, 7.2. This is JavaScript, forms, and buttons. Okay, so I'm going to make my style sheet, right-click, new file, 7.2 style. .css, not CCSS. Okay, like that. I'm going to link my JavaScript file inside of the body still. I'm going to put script src at the bottom of everything because I want my script to be able to read the entirety of my HTML structure so that I can find the thing that I'm focused on specifically. So I need to make my 7.2 main.js by right-clicking on scripts, new file. 7.2 main.js. Make sure you have that JS file extension, not HJS. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to go through and close my 7.1 stuff since it's going to be distracting, and then I'll only have my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript open up for 7.2. So just like as src on an image, we got to start with the subfolder and then add the file. Scripts do not need content in the middle. You can just have a start and an end tag. So they're not technically an element by our usual definition, but they are needing both a start and an end tag. All right, I'm gonna go back and link my 7.1 index, or my 7.2 index, excuse me, to my table of contents. So a high ref 7.2 index.html, 7.2, and then I'm gonna add a little horizontal line under here just for funsies. Okay, now I need to link my style sheet, same way we've been doing it, link, enter, and then styles 7.2 style. I need a type equals text/CSS. All stuff we've been doing, but it's the setup required to make a complete page now. Okay, this is version number 1, so I'm gonna go to line 9 and add a V1 and then quick comment it out with control question mark so that I have a little version history of what I'm doing here as I do it, right? Okay, I'm gonna check and make sure real quick that my 7.2 is working. So I'm gonna type a little placeholder text. I'm gonna hit enter and go lorem enter so that I get a bunch of lines here. And then if I go to, oh, I need to run it. That would be a good start, I think. So I'm gonna go live, see what my output's looking like. All right, cool. My page works. Let me see if my home page works. Close that. I'm actually gonna run and debug this time so that I don't have to get weird. Okay, 7.2, perfect. 7.1, perfect. All right, I'm all functional. I'm all set up. My my pre-production stuff has occurred. You can see my JavaScript is working because my debug console has worked or has popped up with our console.log that we did last week. We're all good to get started. Okay, so on 7.2, I'm going to delete this line 12 since I don't need it. It was just placeholder. All right. On 7.2, we're going to be talking about 2 new HTML elements called forms and buttons. Thankfully, they do what their name suggests, so you can imagine what they're used for. But in order for them to work, we need some specific things in our JavaScript, and that is declaring a function. So we talked about this briefly on Friday with the idea that in order for a function to be functional, you're going to get real sick of me saying the word function. In order for a function to be functional, we have to declare it and configure it, and then later call it. So we got to write it up first and then ask for it when a specific thing happens, like a button gets clicked or the page gets loaded. If you can imagine which on click or on load each of those are. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. When you want to make a function in JavaScript, yeah, Jack, what's up? What's up? Yeah, I need to reattach these Zoom rooms from last week still. I forgot on Friday. So I'll do that 7th period today. Okay, anyways. Yes, this will be available, but at the end of the week. I'm changing Zoom rooms to be available at the end of the week on Fridays instead of when they come out. So you need to pay attention in class as well. Okay, function is the first word that you type in your JavaScript when you are assigning a function to something, when you're configuring something to be executed, right? You're writing a program here. After the word function, you know I've done it right when it turns kind of this like denim blue, like jean blue. Then you put the name of your function. And for our purposes today is going to be all lowercase button, capital C, click. And then, because this is the name of our function, parentheses after it. This is going to configure it into a function called button click. Just like this. You need the parentheses and you need the camel case. You have to name a function in order for it to be called upon later. So, just like CSS, once you've you've written the word function and given it a name, you put curly brackets. So that's where our actual function is going to happen. So the names of your functions are also like classes and IDs in HTML and CSS. They can be whatever you want, but you want them to be specific to the purpose that they serve. And since this one's going to be when we click a button, I'm going to call it button click. You could call it whatever. If you know what it means, great. But I have mine set to name what their function is. Okay, so let me pull up my, oops, that's not what I wanted. All right, one sec. Had some notes here. Basically, after you've set your function and you've given it a name, this is where we're going to start doing stuff inside of that specific function. So we're going to start with the word document. So we're focused on our HTML, and then we're going to go get elements by ID. It's going to be the most common use case of your document.get. Get element by ID, parentheses, quotes. Inside of these quotes is going to be the ID with the the ID that the elements are attached to that our JavaScript is going to look for. So we're going to call this color change because that's the what we're going to set the button to here in just a second. So let me go into my explore here real quick. Give me 2 seconds. And okay. All right, I'm almost ready. Hold on. All right, cool. So now we have our document. We have our get element by ID, specifically the color change ID. Next thing we're going to be changing, good morning, about these elements of color change is the style. Thank you. So each time you introduce a new step in your program, it's usually separated by a period. So if we're looking at the document for an element of color change, we want to change the style of that element to the color, space equals, quotes, red, and then semicolon. So let me break down every step along our executable here, thinking like the computer, because it can only follow direct instructions, right? When the function of button click is ran, look at the document for the element of color change, or elements with an ID of color change their style, specifically their color, equal to this value. We've set it to red for demonstration purposes, but you could put a hex code in here. You could put all types of other different color options here. Recognize color names by the CSS. Anything works inside of these quotes. But it's specifically this style and this color are the important parts because that's what we're actually trying to change here. So we have our JavaScript written out, but we don't have any HTML to support it. We have no structure. It's kind of an ethereal just vibe out into the nothing, out into the internet. We need something to attach it to. The thing that we're going to attach it to is the button element. So we're going to go button. It's a really easy one to remember. Hashtag color change. And we want that case, the camel case, to match the part of the JavaScript that we wrote just a second ago. So when I hit enter, that's going to create a button with an ID of color change and no content in the middle. So if I go live on this HTML document currently, there's this little teeny tiny button that doesn't do anything because we've not given it any sort of command yet. This is optional, but I'm going to go into my CSS real quick and remove the default padding and make my font size a little bit larger. And if you want a selector that focuses on pretty much everything, you can just use an asterisk. And then curly brackets, I'm going to set my margin and padding both to 0. And then I'm going to set my font size to 200% or 125%, worked better actually. That's padding. Because it's a little easier for you guys to see, you do not have to do this. This is also just making sure that my CSS is connected properly. Okay, so asterisk, margin padding 0, font size 125%. If I go back to my output, it's actually made it smaller, so that's okay. All right, so if we go back to the HTML, on line 12, we have a start and an end tag, but no content. So we do not have a button element yet. So similar to a link, it won't appear very well until you give it some content, some actual clickable, oh, not well, I was thinking and talking at the same time. It'll give you some actual content to click on in between the two tags. So if I go back to my output, I now have a click me button that when I click on it, does nothing because we haven't given it the on-click event yet, which is what we're going to do here shortly. If we go back to our VS Code, or sorry, our agenda, I mean, go into the replies. There is a ton of stuff on how to configure a button, inputs and forms, as well as some JavaScript functions, on-click, on-load, and some basic CSS animations, kind of, which we'll get into if we have time. But we're going to focus right here on this on-click option, which is an event that when the mouse is clicked or when the element is clicked on, then we can run a function. So just like it has here on the W3 Schools, we're going to add this on-click attribute, but we're going to put our function's name inside of the quotes here so that when the button is clicked, it runs that specific function that we've configured. So if I go over to my button, after the ID parentheses, I'm going to add the on-click event. So on-click like this equals, my function is called button click, and I need it exactly the same, including the parentheses that I've written in the JavaScript here. So if I go over to onClick, button, capital C, click, and then parentheses, so that when this button is clicked, it runs this function, whatever that function is inside of the JavaScript. So if we go back to our output, since what we've done is focus on the document, get the color change element, and change its color to red, when I click on my which apparently I don't have an output running. Let me fix that real quick. Okay. We have a click me button, and when I click on it, it's going to run that function because we gave it the onClick event. The onClick event became true, so the function ran. Just like media queries in CSS, the condition was met, so the function happened. When I refresh, it goes away though. It doesn't stick around. If I click it a bunch, I'm clicking it a ton right now, it doesn't change between black and red, or default and red, I mean, default and configured. It only works one time once you load the page. So every time I click refresh, it'll start working again, but it will stay not working until I refresh the page again. With refreshing, you're doing something called loading the page, right? Which we can use the onload event listener, or the onload event, to also run another type of function, right? It says right here, the W3 Schools, that the onload is most often used within the body element to execute a script once a page has completely loaded all the content, including the images, other scripts, CSS files, and etc. Usually this is more of a utility sort of JavaScript, where it just checks your language, makes sure your screen size is the right size, whatever. But we'll use it here in just a second to make an alert appear. So to make an alert appear, we're going to write another JavaScript function, and you're going to see the whole process once more. We're going to start by typing out function, and then we're going to call this one page load, curly or parentheses, and then curly bracket. And inside of these curly brackets is where we're going to put an alert event. Okay, so we've written the word function, and we've given our function a name. Now it's time to configure this function. I want an alert, which is another name for a pop-up. And inside of the parentheses and the quotes is where I'm going to put the text that appears on the pop-up. This is a pop-up on screen. Okay, so before I go back and check this is a very simple JavaScript function. If I go back and I run my page, which I closed again, it's a bad habit, so I'm going to run and debug this time. Okay, our event doesn't happen. Even though we wrote the alert to happen when the page loads, our JavaScript still works, or our button still works fine, but our pop-up does not. It's because we've not added the onload like we did with button click. Onload is typically going to go in your body start tag. So I'm going to add onload right here. So when the page is loaded, it's going to run the name of the function page load. So I go in here, page load, parentheses, turns it into a function. So now when I refresh, you're going to notice that my Chrome now has a pop-up on the screen because it's specifically looking for events, instances that are happening in real time, whether that's loading or clicking, to make certain functions happen inside of the JavaScript. And these are extremely basic to show you how they work. You can unlock a ton of functionality on your pages by using just these onClicks and onloads. It adds a huge amount of interaction for your user. For whatever function you want it to appear, onClick and onload are going to make them happen in specific instances. So your JavaScript for note-taking purposes should look something like mine currently for 7.2. Kind of quick reference it from the Zoom room. This is all I've got on my style sheet. It's not required yet. You don't need anything in the style sheet, but this is what I have in mind. And then my index page has the onload attached to the body, a button with an ID and an onClick event, and then my script is after my button so that it has enough information, the JavaScript, has enough information to interpret and understand what I'm asking of it by the time the recipe gets to step 13. So for our purposes, we're still keeping the script lower in the document flow. You can put it up in the brain inside of the head container, but we're keeping it down here for learning purposes so that it can see everything that it needs to see before it starts doing its thing. So the other two things I want to talk about, if we look at the agenda here, let's close this debug. Our agenda, has moved over to the other screen, of course. We did function declarations and we added our onClick and our onload. We will talk about CSS animations at a different date or another time because I want to get through HTML and JavaScript buttons and forms. So buttons and forms are ways that you can also eventually evolve into something like an account system or like a password username. I guess that's an account system, but you can leave comments. You can have a thing where your user can actually start participating in your website instead of just looking at it and reading it. So the way you do that, we've got buttons. there's a new type of container element like div called form. So if I type out form, if I could spell, we're going to take out this action for now, because we don't have to do anything with that yet. Form, start and end tag, hit enter. This is going to behave a lot like an ordered and unordered list, or like a table, where form acts like a container for a form, and inside of the form container are going to be inputs. Just type it out exactly like that. So before you commit to a full element in HTML with the input, let's check out the thread for the week. Let's look at HTML input right here. HTML input and form are the next two that we're going to be focusing on. The input tag has a ton of different use cases. There's a bunch of different types that kind of have their own set of pre-existing rules, like password or checkbox or things like that. Let's look at the form W3 Schools, because it has inputs inside of it that display a variety of different things depending on their type attribute. We're going to focus on this first one, input of type equals text, by going over here and set the input, enter. It's going to ask type equals text. It's the text by default. This is input text. So you'll notice that when I type out input and hit enter, it does not add an end tag. It's because input is an inline and a void tag. So it's going to line up with other inputs. And it's also not required to have an end tag, a slash input, at the end of it in order for it to be functional. However, if you look at just the literal composition, the literal pieces of this line number 13, we have a tag, and then we just have some text. That's exactly how it's going to look in your output as well. So if I run this page, this is our pop-up screen, sure. Here's our box to input text, but this is input text is outside of the actual input box. It's not really clear what this box is for that we're inputting. Use case for this would be username and password. So we go into here. We can add a value, just the word value. This is going to be the default text that appears in the box. Appears in the text box. Right? Like this. So now when I refresh that I've configured this value attribute, you can see my Chrome is flashing because our alert on load is working. If I go back here, now we have default text that appears inside of the form. But since the input is not able to contain the entirety of it, it's going to cut off. So we're just going to shorten this down to default text. All right. So I'm going to take off this input text right here. And then I'm going to copy this line, Control C, Control V, and refresh my debug. You'll notice that pop-up window is going to pop up every time. Inputs are inline, so they're going to line up with one another. In order for them to stack in the way they were used to, like a username or password sort of situation, we have to add BRs to the end of each input. We have to add line breaks in order to convert them quickly into block level elements, quote unquote. So now if we go back here, we have default text. Oh, I have a loose BR somewhere. It's weird. Okay, now it's gone. All right, so we can change this default text because that's just the value that's going to load automatically. So if we go here, this are these. You can hit tab to cycle through our tab input boxes like this. I don't want to save it actually. But when I refresh the page, it's going to go back to saying default text. Whatever you put in that value attribute is going to be what happens inside of your input on a form like this. So by adding some more extra specific things, like let's say we wanted a value for, oh, hold on. Let's get this back to working. There we go. So let's say we wanted a value. If we delete this line right here. We wanted one value for username and one value for password. I'm going to refresh my debug and check and see what happens here. Username and password are both visible. There's no censoring like we're used to on a typical password field. On inputs, you can add a name equal to, let's call this one username, and we'll call this bottom one name equals password. So watch what happens when I set this name attribute, just giving my computer more and more specifics in order for things to work. Okay. Refresh my debug here. It's going to find out that, no, password was supposed to be censored. That didn't work. Hold on. Let me see. Let me take let's take this out. I'm going to take these values off, just leave them blank so that it has just a little bit of info to work with. Huh. Okay, let me try something real quick because this is not what I needed it to be. Let's change that to password. Change the input type to password. Let's see, because it worked totally fine in first period. Yes, there we go. Okay, by changing the input type to one of the many defaults, you'll notice that our password is totally censored out, like the way we're used to. So if I just mash my keyboard, it's going to censor the password input box, but not the username input box, because there are specific rules for each of the default names. So, like for example, if we were to start these over, and I just type out input and scroll, you can see there are a ton of options that are going to have their default sets or their default set of styling and function. So let's do input submit. Just put a value of submit so I know what I'm working with here. Refresh. I can click on submit and it's going to reload the page. All right. So inside of your agenda, let's talk a little bit about what I'm asking for 2.3. Inside of your agenda, there are 2 different links for buttons, 2 different links for inputs and forms, another link to the JavaScript functions in W3, some help with on-click and on-load, and a video if you're interested in some basic CSS animations to enable JavaScript CSS animations. This video is more than we've covered in class, so if you're pretty comfortable with what I'm talking about, that should make sense, but if you're not, don't worry. We'll get to there, or I'll provide resources eventually if you need them. Excuse me. But to recap, you start by writing function, and then you name your function, and then you do your function, and then you can add the onload and on-click events to your attributes in order for them to actually happen when specific things happen on the HTML page. Before I let you go, you can click on other elements that are not buttons. So if I add a color, a P hashtag color change, then a capital P, it's going to give me a new paragraph with an ID, paragraph, and then we'll do that for a div as well. So div hashtag color change div, hit enter. Okay, and this is div. If I refresh and go back to my output, I can see that there's a paragraph in a div. My click me works, but nothing happens because I haven't written that function yet. So if I go back to my JavaScript, I'm going to leave some comments now that I'm starting to get multiple functions here. Above button click, I'm going to type out button color change so that I know that this is what that function does. And then I'm going to comment that out with control question mark. So when I come back and look at whatever I was creating with JS, I know that that function is for button color change. Okay, this is for page load alerts. Comment that out so I can see it later. And now we're going to do a quick function for paragraph on click and div on click. Comment both of these out, kind of like little chapter markings. Okay. So to start, I declare my function by writing out function, and then I give it a name of, what did I, oh, well, we can call it whatever we want. Okay, para click, and then parentheses, curly brackets. Make sure your curly brackets go outside of your parentheses. We'll do that same thing for div on click. So function, div click, parentheses, curly brackets. The name in the parentheses is what turns this from a parameter into an actual function. All right, so it's the same process for button click. So we're going to go document, not capitals, lowercase. JavaScript is very case sensitive. Document.get element by ID, and that element is within parentheses and quotes. That element is color change P. So I'm just going to control C this from here, control V from there. Affect the style, so dot style, and then we'll change the dot color to equal to blue, or red, green. I'm gonna go green. You need that semicolon after each event or each thing that happens inside of your JavaScript function in order to separate it just like CSS would. Okay, so I've got this line here. I'm going to Control C that and Control V it. Control V it into my div. But I need to change my ID so that it all functions here. Copy that. Different elements. So Control V the div element inside of the element by ID. I'm going to change the style color to blue this time. Okay, so now that I have my functions configured for, look for in the document, the element of color change P, change its style and its color to be green. Same steps for the div, but set it to blue. And I go to my output and I click on them. Unfortunately, nothing happens. It's because we've not added the onClick event to our HTML yet. It's a lot of connecting things back and forth, making sure that everything connects and communicates with one another. So we're going to do that here. So if I go to my PID of color change, and then I add the onClick event, an attribute, all lowercase, this is going to be, I think it's called paraclick, right? Paraclick parentheses, let me double check. It is. Okay, I'm going to do that same thing for div, still within the start tag. I'm going to go onClick equals div click, and then parentheses. Now when I refresh and I go to my output, it should, when I click on this paragraph, turn it green, which is hard to see. And if I click on this div, it should turn it blue, which is also hard to see on the screen. But you can see that it's happening on the Zoom room. So for example's sake, I'm going to Control C this, Control V, change the color to be font weight, change it to bold. And I'm going to copy this line for here as well. Make sure that anytime you're copying and pasting in JavaScript that your IDs and your functions all match up so that it's all working. It's all well and good. So now when I click on these, they should turn bold. See, my div didn't work because I forgot a step somewhere. So I'll change div bold. Why did that not work? OnClick should be div click. Div click looks good. Refresh that. Okay. Div's not turning bold for some reason. Paragraph is, but div is not. Huh. Wonder why that is. Okay. Time to debug. Let's see why div's not working. I can't tell because the blue part's working. Am I missing something? Color change div.
I don't think that W should be.
Oh, I'm missing an E.
Oh,
That'll do it. I don't know why that happened, but that'll do it. All right, refresh. Now when I click on the div, it'll turn bold and blue. And when I turn on the paragraph, it turns bold and blue. All right, so you can click on any element. You can give the onClick event to any HTML element. It's just most commonly going to be used with buttons because your user's going to be like, oh, button. I'm going to click on it. Okay, so your HTML should look something like mine. If you've been following along, you can check real quick. I'll be able to check as I wander. But for 7.2, well, my style sheet just has the basics. Okay, that's my style sheet if you want to check your notes or check yours against mine. And then here's my JavaScript with comments breaking down each of the things that they do. Okay, your JavaScript should look similar. What I'm asking on 7.2, what I want you guys to do here, you go to the you can click the link right here and it'll take you to it in Canvas. Deadline of January 9th is highlighted, so you know that it's coming up and it's going to be staying that way for the rest of the stuff. So we need to create a complete web page that's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I'm just now remembering that I was supposed to update this in first period and have not yet. So, but basically what I'm asking for 7.2 is that you have a button and a form of some type on your page that reacts with a JavaScript function, exactly like I've walked you through here if you've been following along as best you guys can. So this is not due until Friday, so don't try to, don't panic. Try to finish it in the next, 10 minutes. So in the meantime, I'm going to wrap up this Zoom room and then I'll help you guys with your one-on-one questions. But before I do that, does anybody have any questions for the good of the order? Is this making sense a little bit? Okay, if we're good, then I'll help you guys with your specific questions one-on-one. Thank you guys for listening. I'm going to wrap this up and I will be around. Give me just a second.